Good evening. I'm Galen Wobeter with the League of Women Voters, Johnson County. I would like to welcome all of you here tonight, the candidates, the audience, and those viewing on television. This forum will be rebroadcast on our 3 public education and government channels in Coralville, Iowa City, and North Liberty. Please check their websites for the schedules. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan volunteer organization that encourages citizens to participate in their government. While the League does study and take stands on issues, we never endorse or support political candidates or positions. We do encourage our members as individuals, as we encourage each of you to get involved in your community and the political party of your choice. We also encourage you to vote on or before November 4th. We want to welcome this evening the participation and collaboration of the newly formed Iowa City chapter of the League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC. As part of their emphasis on engaging their membership in the political process of becoming informed citizens, they are here tonight not only with some LULAC members, but also with the Spanish translators that I just mentioned, and a special LULAC question for each of the candidates. The views expressed in this forum are those of the candidates. All viable candidates have been invited to participate. League members are distributing cards and pencils so that you may ask questions. You are welcome to submit as many questions for the candidates as you wish. Just hold up the cards and a League member will collect them throughout the forum. Questions that fall in the same general area may be consolidated to allow us to cover as many topics as possible in the time allotted. If your question were not addressed, feel free to contact the candidates directly. Campaign literature is welcome outside this room following the forum. We ask that, again, no buttons, signs, or literature be worn or distributed until then. Now to the format. We're going to divide our time tonight in half. The first 45 minutes will be for the 3 candidates who are running for the 2 open county supervisor seats. The next 45 minutes will be for the Iowa legislative and House and Senate seats. After the candidates have been introduced, they will each have 2 minutes for opening remarks. I'll then pose the first question from the League to the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond. The second question will then be posed from LULAC, also with a 2-minute response time. We will then turn to the audience questions. The speaker order will be rotated as audience questions are posed to the candidates, also with 2-minute response times. At about 7:35 or a little after, we'll turn to 2-minute closing remarks from each candidate. I would now like to introduce our 3 county supervisor candidates. To my far left, to your right, my far left is Janelle Raddick, next John Etheridge, and next to me here is Mike Carberry. And with a 2-minute opening remarks, we'll begin with Mike Carberry.
Well, thank you, Galen, and thank you to everybody for coming, and also to our television audience. I especially like to thank the League of Women Voters and LULAC for sponsoring this forum. I believe they're very, very important to educate the voters and prospective voters on the candidates and where they stand on the issues. I have been a resident of Johnson County since 1976. I'm the son of a large animal veterinarian and a school teacher. Come from a large Irish Catholic family of 9. We were taught at a very young age to provide, give back to the community. Public service was a way of life in my family. And I've always done that. I've been involved in many activities over the course of my life. And professionally, I got involved in being an environmental advocate about 1997. And so I've worked on sustainability issues, wind and solar, as an environmental lobbyist since 1997. A few years ago, I decided that I wanted to work a little closer to home. I think that Johnson County is the greatest place to live in Iowa, if not the Midwest. I think that a lot of rankings have backed me up on that. Iowa City, Johnson County constantly fall in the top 10 places to live, work, and retire. I believe that we're going, because it's so popular, we're also growing very fast. We're the second fastest growing county in the state, and we're gauged to grow another 30,000 people in the next 10 years. I think that growth is going to be an issue. How do we manage that growth? How do we manage the budget? How do we manage that growth sustainably? I'm looking forward to answering the questions about that. Again, I'm glad to be here, and I'm going to ask people once and probably again for your support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Now, John Etheridge.
Hi, I'm John Etheridge, and I'm running for re-election to the Johnson County Board of Supervisors, and I'm asking for your support. Since my election in the spring of 2013, I've been able to work with our state representatives and local county and city councils to benefit the residents of Johnson County, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that after November 4th, and I'm re-elected. As I say, I was born and raised in Johnson County. And if you hear that, that's my son in the audience. He's 6 months and a week. And my wife, Debbie, is here, as well as my parents. Born and raised Johnson County. Spent most of my time in rural Johnson County, Iowa, the southwest portion of the county. And really have come to appreciate the farming and rural aspect of Johnson County, and I do think I bring that perspective to the Board of Supervisors and help represent them, as well as I've lived several years in, 2 years in Iowa City, a year in Coralville, as I moved from apartment to apartment after I got married, and now reside in Lone Tree. And so I've had the opportunity over my adult life to work with the cities as well as the county, and I think I bring a great perspective and unique perspective and representation to the Board of Supervisors, and I'm asking for your support as I am up for election and asking you to vote for me on or before November 4th, only once. So, thank you.
Thank you, John. Now, Janelle Reddick.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters and to Galen and to LULAC. I've been attending League forums for almost 25 years now in Johnson County, and I can't thank you enough for all you do to help voters be informed and also to get registered to vote. Unlike the two folks here, I was not born and raised in Johnson County. I came here, like many of you, for my spouse to go to graduate school. That was almost 25 years ago. And like many people, we started looking around about where else to move, and we just decided that this was the best place on the face of the planet to live. We couldn't understand why we would ever move anywhere. We can always go visit mountains and oceans if we want. My spouse, Robin Butler's in the back of the room, and I am an only child. My mother is not able to be with us today. Unlike John's new baby, our child is a border collie, and they would prefer she's not in the library. It's been a long journey for me in activism and moving into running for office myself. When we first got here, I worked for a nonprofit, and then I worked for Congressman Leach. I then owned my own business. I served on boards and commissions from every level of city, county, and state government. I was appointee by the Governor Culver to the Environmental or Natural Resources Commission. As a supervisor, I'm nearing the end of my first term, and I've had a great list of things I wanted to get done in the first term. But as always, the time goes too quickly, and my to-do list is growing really quick. So thank you for having us. I look forward to the conversation, and thanks for Mike and John. This has been a kind campaign, unlike what we're seeing across the state and country.
Okay, thank you. First, we have the question from the League of Women Voters. What would be the best way to provide county-wide public transit? And we'll start this with John.
Well, That is actually a very difficult question because the county has over 900 and some miles of road. So providing public transit countywide is a very, very tall task, a very difficult order. We do provide seat service to people in the county. So, I mean, there's a form of it available to our residents who have disabilities. So I really don't know if it's economically feasible because it would be, I think, a very hefty tax on the residents to provide that service. As I know the cities providing the public transit that they have, it's a very expensive endeavor. So I don't know how the county could provide a county-wide public transit service. It would be, I mean, I'm not against exploring it, but see if it is viable. But just on the surface, I actually would have to say I really don't see how it will work, but I'm not going to say it's impossible because Johnson County can, I think, make things happen, but I think it'd be up to residents if they would want to tax themselves to provide a countywide public transit system. I think if you choose to live in the rural area of Johnson County, there are certain things that go along with that, and that is there isn't a bus stop every, well, I guess I was going to say block, but, every country mile. So I just don't see how it's viable.
Okay. Janelle?
I think part of the issue is that there are 3 fixed route transit systems in our county and 2 paratransit systems. So the first question we have to ask is, having 5 different transit systems actually economically a great idea, or should we collectively look at consolidating those transit systems? And I've always been in favor of exploring consolidation of the transit systems and creating a transit authority. I just think the duplication there of staffing and equipment and mechanical equipment, there's bound to be some savings there. But I think the broader question is what we are doing as a country on encouraging mass transit and alternative transportation. We seem to be able to come up with hundreds of millions of dollars every time we want to make Interstate 80 wider or a new flyway on 380, which is coming at an unbelievable cost. But transit systems have been nickeled and dimed and have actually been cut in the last few years. And we rank the highest in the state of transit use in Johnson County. We also rank the highest in bus to work and to walk to work or school. So we're embracing alternative transportation here, mass transit, but there aren't federal and state dollars to come forward. It would be really difficult to raise property taxes to a level that we could offer a countywide transit system. I think we really have to explore light rail, in particular leaving from Cedar Rapids down to Iowa City. So we really need some partners, and I would be very interested in some talk about collaboration and consolidation.
Okay. Mike?
Well, as a sustainability advocate, I've been working with the League and Metropolitan Planning Organization of Johnson County and Eastern Iowa Coalition of Governments for years, looking at how we can do this. And I think that Janelle is correct in consolidation is one of the first things we need to look at. We just have too many bus services, and I think there's too much overlap. And what's mostly overlapped is the white-collar jobs in those. If we did some consolidation, we could get some efficiencies by getting rid of a few of the white-collar jobs, and because you're going to actually need more bus drivers and maintenance people because there will be more routes. What we really need is to think of this as a corridor problem, not just a Johnson County problem. And I've been having some discussions with Mark Nolte at the Iowa City Area Development Group, and he tipped me off to this idea that maybe we should look at a regional transit district instead of a county one. Because what we really need is buses and light rail going up and down the corridor. That's the biggest need, is the Scrandic line, reinstall the Scrandic line, possibly having an express bus that runs up and down 380, and then maybe have local routes that go up 965 and Highway 1 through Solon, Mount Vernon, into Cedar Rapids and back. And then you could also then have rush hour and services, say a bus that runs from down to Lone Tree and Hills, and another route that could go from Tiffin and Lone Tree. But doing it, this regional transit district would be under the auspices of the Eastern Iowa Airport, and they could then derive a lot of federal funds, and basically they would oversee the transit districts of both Iowa City, Coralville, Johnson County, and Cedar Rapids and Lynn County as well. So we'd have to work very closely with Lynn County to do that, but I think it's worth pursuing.
Okay, thank you. Now for LULAC's question. A growing national trend is the militarization of local police enforcement. This has been demonstrated by the purchasing of militarized weapons, armor, and vehicles nationally and in Iowa. How should we address the increased militarization of local law enforcement? This time we'll start with Janelle.
Thank you. I have a growing concern about this issue, but even more concerning is it's being done outside of public budgeting, outside of public hearings, outside of public meetings. I have a number of questions about how the two large vehicles that have recently been acquired in Johnson County, something called a CERT vehicle and an MRAP, what their rules are of engagement, what the cost is, what our liability is, what the training is, what the damage is, et cetera, let alone their fuel economy. I'm not naive enough to think that we're not at danger at some points. I just think that large military vehicles and SWAT gear can actually escalate a situation as opposed to de-escalate it. So the rules of engagement are important to me. Mainly, I think the public needs to be engaged. Since all of this was done with no public meetings, no public budgeting, no public hearings, the elected officials in the cities and the county need to hear from you. Because people have actually been talking amongst themselves, but I've only been contacted by citizens 3 times at work about the issue. So I know people are concerned about it, but they certainly have not been sharing that with elected officials. I think that there needs to be an honest conversation from everybody in our county and the elected bodies and the chiefs about what level of police force we actually want here, what level we need, and what level we can afford. But I do think taking an MRAP into some situations would escalate it as opposed to de-escalate it. I'm very concerned.
Thank you. Mike?
Well, I think I agree with Janelle almost entirely on that, but I'd like to say, to go a little bit farther, that, you know, we didn't ask for this MRAP, the CERT vehicles, but we're going to have to pay for the maintenance and everything else. I'd like to look into how we might be able to give them back. I think the answer is that we need more community policing, and we need to engage communities. The disproportionate minority contact of or minority communities in this county is just not good. And I think that we need to take a look at that. We need to do more community policing and start working with those communities instead of targeting them as likely offenders. So we've seen things like down in Ferguson, how the militarization of our police forces can escalate a situation. It's only a matter of time, you know, before it happens here in Johnson County. People get out on the streets, and all of a sudden the MRAP comes out, and if especially the people on the streets are a little bit riled up, things could get out of hand in a short order, and things could get ugly. I don't think anybody wants that. I'd like to de-escalate this militarization, and I think part of that would be looking at maybe returning those vehicles for a full refund.
Thank you. John?
Thank you. Well, I do want to start out and say that the way this was purchased, at least the MRAP, was with monies that were not from the taxpayer. They're purchased through drug forfeiture money, which the county actually has no jurisdiction to tell the sheriff, who is his own elected official, how to spend that money. Now, it wasn't purchased directly by the sheriff. It was purchased with drug forfeiture money from the sheriff as well as through other entities. Now, I know a lot of people are concerned about the militarization of our police force, but I will say that a lot of our police gear, the bulletproof vest, the helmets, the gear that they wear every day was designed and used by the military first. So it's one of those things where it's used to protect them and make sure these officers can return home to their families at the end of each shift. And the MRAP is not an offensive vehicle. I have friends who've driven these in Afghanistan and Iraq. And can they be outfitted to maybe be semi-offensive? Well, I think you mount a 50 cal on it, but anybody with a, pretty much anybody can walk down to Shields and buy a 50 cal gun anyway. So it's one of those things where I want to make sure our officers are protected and can return home to their families at the end of each shift. The MRAP that was purchased by the sheriff, by the sheriff and the other entities, is basically a shield on wheels. It has no 50 cal mounted on it. It is basically to house our officers and keep them protected while they are performing their duty to protect the citizens of Johnson County. Now, if people disagree with that, I urge them to contact our sheriff. He is an elected official, and he was one of the people who was involved in the purchase. And so I would just ask that people just take a look and contact the sheriff. They can contact us as well.
Thank you. Okay, we've got a lot of good audience questions here. We're not going to get through them all. Here is the first one. Rural Iowa generally is facing a depopulation crisis as more and more young people gravitate to urban areas. What can or should the supervisors be doing to retain a stable rural population in our small communities? Okay, this one we start with, Mike.
Okay. And I would agree with that. I think the two things that can really help us in rural Iowa is broadband service. Iowa ranks at near the bottom of all states in broadband penetration in rural areas. So the internet's very slow in those areas, and therefore not many businesses are going to want to locate in rural Iowa, and especially rural Johnson County, because of the lack of broadband internet access. So one of the first things we need to do, I think, is to make sure, working with our state legislatures or whoever we can, is to increase our broadband speeds in rural Iowa, and especially in rural Johnson County. And the second thing is to get jobs out there. And we need more economic development. We need to work with Iowa City area economic development authorities. We need to work with regional economic development authorities. We need to bring better jobs into Johnson County and the corridor. And not all of them are going to set up shop in Iowa City. Some of them might be in rural areas, in unincorporated areas of Johnson County. Others might be in a small town like Lone Tree. It's not far from Iowa City. Housing prices are lower than Iowa City. So I could easily see some business set up shop in a small Johnson County community, but we're going to have to work with our economic development groups to help attract them, and we're going to need that broadband access.
Okay. John.
Thank you. I guess depopulation, of rural Iowa is, I know it's a concern for some counties in the southwest portion of Iowa, especially Adams County, as they are losing population versus gaining. Johnson County is actually gaining in population. So it's one of those things where, I think the state can help a lot with this, just because Johnson County is growing, some other counties are decreasing. Johnson County is really focused on what we can do here in Johnson County to encourage growth, to encourage the farming community, to encourage organic growth, to do things of that nature. While there are other counties in Iowa where they don't have the hub like we have, which is the crossroads of 380 and I-80, as well as Cedar Rapids to the north, and the University of Iowa here. So we are a huge attraction to people. So we actually, I don't think, have the as big a concern with depopulation of rural Johnson County as other counties do. So for Johnson County, it's more of working with residents for them to live where they would like to live. I'd say it's kind of the opposite for Johnson County. Really, everybody wants to live in this area. And I definitely understand why, having lived here my entire life. So, thanks.
Thank you. Janelle?
I think every city in Johnson County is growing except for one, and that's University Heights. And that's just because if someone moves out that had a bunch of kids, the numbers change, but it's landlocked. And so I think this issue is really, really important in Iowa. But we actually suffer from the reverse, and that is, what are we going to do with all the demand of people who want to live here? And what stress is that going to put on our infrastructure and our water quality and air quality and our roads? But one of the things I think is important is to diversify the economy so that people don't have to always drive into town for jobs and into the urban area for jobs. And, down around Frytown, we're seeing a great growth in the natural eggs and the natural milk and the organic. We're seeing some of the orchards and the wineries, and we approved a country inns ordinance, some rural tourism, some rural economic development. The Board of Supervisors has been working very closely with our economic development organization called Iowa City Area Development to talk about pockets of the county that may be advantageous for some economic development. I think that's part of the problem, is being able to keep some jobs that are good jobs out in different small cities or villages. But I think our bigger problem is, how are we going to deal with this growth? And it's putting stress on everything that we do. And we could sit here and talk to you for the next 6 hours about every problem or concern we have about growth. And I think that's a much bigger issue for our county than depopulation.
Thank you. Next question. Do you support the bond issue for the courthouse annex? Why or why not? And we're going to start with John.
Thank you. Well, Johnson County, I don't know how many of you know this, but Johnson County is a growing county. And the courthouse has housed just the county attorney since, I think the year I was born. Anyway, other county services have all moved to the admin building. And Johnson County hasn't decreased in population since then. We've only increased. So as that happens, not everyone's good to each other all the time. So court cases increase and caseloads increase. And right now we're facing up to a year and a half delay in civil trials. So one of these things that the courthouse annex will help to allay is, allow people to get I wouldn't say satisfactory, but get justice a lot quicker than what is happening right now. So I support a courthouse annex. I do have a lot of reserves about the $33.4 million for it, which is why I will be working with, if it passes, I will be working with our project manager and everybody we can to try and say, okay, is that absolutely necessary right at this point? Because I want to make sure I'm completely conscious of all the taxpayer money that is going into this. And while the impact is more minimal, it still has an impact on residents. And I just want to make sure that every dollar we spend is spent wisely and it is absolutely necessary.
Thank you. Janelle?
4 years ago, when I ran, this question was out there and it involved the jail. And I said the courthouse should be our number one priority. And the reason is you can't export out your courthouse. You can't ship it off somewhere else. But you can do that with inmates. And the fact that our courthouse is a beautiful building, but was built for a different time, for a different population. I think there were 30,000 people who lived here when it was built. When I moved here, there were about 100,000 people. We're up to 140 and counting right now. The lack of court space is driving everything else. Trials are being delayed. Inmates are in jail longer. If you want a civil trial, good luck. It's about 2 to 3 years, so don't get in a dispute with a family member or a neighbor or anything. You won't get a court date. I think the lack of both trial space in the courtrooms and in a lot of meeting rooms is really driving some of the costs we're seeing in housing inmates. I'm really glad that we've moved off the jail for now, and we're going to focus on the courthouse. I am supportive of the courthouse annex. I don't know what else we could do with this project. Construction costs in our county are escalating about 7 to 8% a year. And that's just because there's $2 billion of construction going on. So every day we delay, this project's just going to get more expensive. I'm pleased that we hammered out an agreement to put it below ground, to not detract, and that we hammered out an agreement that doesn't include any jail space for now. I hope people will get out and vote, and if this isn't the project you want, please tell us what it is, because I think doing nothing really isn't an option.
Thank you. Mike?
Right. As Janelle said, our courthouse was built, I believe, in early 1900s. We had 25,000 people, and now we have 140,000, and we have the same courthouse. There are massive issues of safety, security, accessibility, and space with the current courthouse. So I have supported this courthouse annex bond issue. I would have liked to seen the number much lower. I didn't have any power to do that at that time. 33.4 million is a lot of money. I think that if it were a bit in my power, I would have liked to seen that number less than 30 million. I really like the design. I like that it's mostly underground. But like we're saying, 2 to 3 years for a civil trial is unacceptable. And we're keeping people in jail so long because they're there for pretrial detention. Also, there's not enough room for our diversion programs for both the sheriff's office and the county attorney's office. If they had more space, we'd have more diversion programs, be able to expand those, and keep more people out of jail. So for those and many reasons, I support this. I just wish the number had come in lower. So I encourage everybody to take a look at the needs first. And as Janelle said, the costs are going to increase 8% a year. So if we don't do it now, this is probably going to come back in a year or two, and it's going to be, if it comes back in 2 years, it's going to be 16% more. So we need to do it now, and we need to follow every dollar, like John said.
Okay, next question. And I think let's try to keep the answers to this for 1 minute because time is running short. And this time we will start with Janelle. What items are on your to-do list?
I actually think that we need to look at the expanding human services funding with our partners. There are about almost 19,000 people in our county that are food insecure. And about 50% of those are children. So 19,000 people are going to go to bed tonight and not know how they're going to eat the rest of the week. And I just think that we need to focus on how, with our nonprofits and our partners, we can start doing that. We have to focus on our infrastructure. We have to continue to focus on our finances. It's really important that we watch every dollar so that we can reprioritize and meet our priorities without raising taxes all the time. And I was cut off, so I could go on another hour.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Yeah, I also have a long list of things I'd like to do, but I'll just hit on a couple real quickly. I think our growth plan needs to be reviewed and amended. We need to stop our urban sprawl. We need to do more infill development, and I could go on and on. I could talk a half hour just about that. We need to make Johnson County the local foods capital of Iowa. There's such a high demand for local food in Johnson County, yet you go onto a farmer's market, and almost all the farmers are outside the county. The last thing I want to mention, and you can find all the other lists on my at Mike Carberry or carberryforsupervisor.com. The last one is to take a look at the sensitive areas ordinance. I think right now that we need to tweak that a little bit so it doesn't become what's basically document and destroy. We need to take a look at that and make sure that a sensitive area, anytime you build anything more than 2 units, which would be like a farmstead split, if you do anything more than the farmstead split, you're subject to sensitive areas ordinance.
John?
Thank you. Well, the thing at the top of my to-do list is to continue to work to lower the cost of government to the residents of Johnson County. I've been able to work with our state legislators to get a bill passed, House File 2366, to allow electronic storage of voter registrations, which that's about $4,000 a year, and that's just in paper costs, doesn't even include staff. So it's one of those things where I look to continue that and work with our local legislators, and there are a number of them in this room. And one person who helped out a lot last time is Bobby Kaufman, Sally Stutzman, Bob Dvorsky, and there are a lot of people, so I want to stop there. I think that I named everybody in the room there. But increasing efficiency in county government, lowering the cost of government to the people. The land use plan, I think, also needs to be brought up for review, and so that way we can work with ICAD and other people who want to open up a business and, promote our rural area.
Okay, thank you. Now, we have a lot more really good questions, but our time is out, and so we do need to move to the summaries for each of these 3 candidates. If you would take 2 minutes at the most and summarize why you should be elected to be a county supervisor. And we will start with Mike.
I get to kick off and again. Excellent. Well, again, thank you to League of Women Voters and LULAC and all the great questions from the public and all those watching on television. Again, I'm Mike Carberry. I've been in Johnson County since 1976. I have a love for Johnson County like nobody else. I want to continue to make it one of the top 10 places to live in the country, and I think it's the best place to live in Iowa and the Midwest. We're going to have a lot of issues related to growth, how we manage that growth. I think I've been training for this job all of my life. My work, my education, my work, the community services that I've provided or volunteered for is really trained me to be a really good supervisor. I ask for your vote on or before November 4th. And again, I thank everybody for the opportunity to come to the forum.
Thank you. John?
Well, I forgot to do it at the beginning, so I'll do it right now. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for holding the forum, so my apologies for not recognizing that at the beginning. It's really important for people to find out who they're voting for and really recognize why they're voting for them. I believe I've shown in the past 19 months that I can represent Johnson County really well. I can work with everybody. And I don't know how many of you know this, but there is no aisle on the Board of Supervisors. We sit right next to each other. I sit between, Pat Harney and Terrence Nugel. And so it's one of the things where if you want to get anything done in Johnson County, you have to work with everybody. You don't just get a pick, I'm going to only work with this person or this party. It's just being able to work together to accomplish things. And I think I've been able to do that, as well as work with our city governments. I've had a number of city councilors just really appreciate being able to work with me, being approachable, as well as a lot of voters have, realized that my door is always open, but I'm not always in my office. And it's because I'm traveling about trying to visit with the residents and find out on their terms, visit them in their residence, find out what's happening and what Johnson County can do to be better. And I'm asking for your vote to continue to do that on or before November 4th. And again, our auditor is in the room, so vote once. and make his life much easier. So thank you.
Thank you. Janelle.
Thank you to the sponsors and for all of you being here. You may be here for what comes next, but I appreciate your being here. Thanks to Mike and John. I joked earlier, it's been a pleasure to run with you. It hasn't been nasty. There's been no heatedness. And vote early if you want the telephone calls to end and the door knocking. Otherwise, I'm all for going to the polls, but it will end if you vote early. So you can vote every single day from here on out and visit it. I want to thank you all for giving me one term in office. I've focused a lot on financial issues, financial transparency, budgeting, reserve policies, financial policies. If you look at our website, you'll see a lot of financial information. That wasn't there 5 years ago. I've focused on transparency on our meetings. Our meetings are live streamed. I've worked on sustainability, on stormwater management, on green energy. I've worked on improving our roads and bridges. I really was concerned about those. I remain concerned. But 4 years goes by really quickly, and my to-do list is really long. I think we have to continue to look at our financial, the way we manage our budgets, the way we manage our staff, our equipment. There are still savings there if we work harder. I think we do have to focus on those who are living in poverty in our county, and how do we work to help them find better jobs and education to get out of poverty. I think we do have to diversify our economy, and we have to really focus on our partnerships with our state and federal government. We simply can't do this alone. And so I would appreciate your vote on November 4th. I can't thank you enough for being here. If at any time, this was pretty short, you have any questions, please call, email, tweet, smoke signal, whatever it takes to get a hold of me. I'd be glad to talk to you in more detail. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you to all three candidates. We're going to regroup now and have the state legislative candidates please come forward, and the supervisor candidates can sit out in the audience. At this point, we have Senate District 39 candidate Kevin Kinney, and we have House District 73 candidates David Johnson and Bobby Kaufman. Mr. Kinney's opponent, Michael Moore, was unable to attend tonight. They're all three, though, running for state legislature, so the questions would be relevant for all of them. We'll use the same format. Each candidate will begin with opening remarks for 2 minutes, followed by the league question, the LULAC question, and audience questions. And at the end, which about 8:10, we'll turn to their closing remarks. So we're going to get right going here, and we will start with opening remarks from David Johnson.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the League of Women Voters as well as LULAC. I'd also like to thank my opponent, Bobby, for his 2 years of service, and I'd like to thank Kevin for his service in law enforcement. I'm from a small town in West Branch, Iowa. I'm the youngest of 7 children, so obviously we didn't have a lot of money when I was growing up, which meant that we didn't have a college fund. But for me, education was the key to success for my life, and I understood that at a very early age. So to get an education, I went ahead and volunteered for service in the United States Army. And because I did that, I was allowed to have the GI Bill, which got me my education, which also got me my career and where I'm at. I have 3 children and a wife, and we live out in West Branch, and I served on the city council from the years of 2008 through 2012. It was during this time on the council that I really got an education on not only city finances, but the finances of the state and how state decisions can adversely affect what's going on at the city and the county levels. So that was really the impetus for my run here this year as well. You're going to hear a lot of topics, not only tonight, but from now until the end of the election. But I just want to briefly cover 3 areas that are really, really important to me. Education. I believe that education is not only important just for our children, but I think it's very important for economic viability, especially here in Iowa City and Coralville. We need to increase the minimum wage because I think the wage that we have now is simply a non-livable wage, and we need to bring that up. That will also help the economy. And third, we need to start to tackle some of our corporate welfare problems that we have in this state. I think we can do that, and those are some of the 3 objectives I plan on going after.
Okay, Bobby Kaufman?
Well, thank you to the League for having me again. I'm Representative Bobby Kaufman. I too would like to thank my opponent for his service and Kevin for his service in law enforcement. I actually know, like, and respect both of these gentlemen, so it's been a nice, positive campaign. The one thing I'm campaigning on is one simple word, and that is results. These past 3 years, my brother and I have door knocked on 15,000 doors plus. In this campaign cycle, we will have knocked on every single registered voter's door in my district. What that does is it allows me to have a good feel for what the folks want. And if you look at my record, it's something that I'm proud to stand on. You look at elder abuse. We were one of only 3 states that did not have a strong elder abuse law. I sat on that final conference committee with our Senator Bob Dvorsky, and this state now has an elder abuse law. And the Heritage Area Agencies gave me the Legislator of the Year for that work. You look at today we had a Pet Protective Order press conference, and I was able to work again with many Democrats and pass legislation that's aimed at curbing domestic violence and aimed at trying to prevent the torturing of pets. And for that work, I was able to receive the Friends of Dog Award. You look at REAP funding and the environment. I sat on the Ag Conference Committee that brought us $25 million for REAP. Unfortunately, the part of that was vetoed, of which I strongly did not support. And I was also proud to support a lot of water quality funding. On the source of education, I was among a group of Republicans who insisted on 4% allowable growth for our schools for 2015, supported our community colleges with a record one-time investment, and supported a record 2-year tuition freeze at the University of Iowa. So I say all this not to brag, but I say all this to show that we're able to deliver results. All this was done in split government. We're not Washington, D.C. I'm able to work with our local officials. I've co-sponsored a bill with every member of our House in the Johnson County Democratic delegation, and most importantly, we're able to do all of this while still balancing budgets, paying down our debt, and returning money to the taxpayer. So if there's one thing I want in this introduction, it's to show that as your legislator these last 2 years, I've been able to deliver results to you.
Thank you. Kevin Kinney?
Hi, I'm Kevin Kinney. I'm running for the Senate District 39. I live and farm our family Century Farm south of Oxford. I am married to my wife, Debbie, and we have 2 grown children, Sean and Megan. I grow corn, soybeans, and have a stock cow herd on our farm. In the 80s, I went to work at the sheriff's office. I was going to go to the sheriff's office for 2 years, but I've since stayed and now can retire if I wish. At the sheriff's office, I worked my way up through the ranks, worked starting in the jail, going to patrol, then into investigations, and now I'm the lieutenant in charge of the investigations division. Also, at the sheriff's office, I've been involved in a number of different boards throughout the state. I was the lean executive board member for the intelligence community in the state. I have been on the United States Attorney's Office Human Trafficking Task Force for the Southern District of Iowa. I am also on the State Attorney General's Office Human Trafficking Task Force. I also have community in my heart and in my background. I've been on the Clear Creek Amana School Board for 9 years. I have been very active in our community on different things through the youth, and I look to serve the state senate and do well there.
Thank you. Okay, the first question is from the League of Women Voters. The League of Women Voters of Iowa has a priority issue to bring online voter registration to Iowa, as it has been proven effective in encouraging more people to vote in the states where it's already implemented. Would you support legislation to allow Iowans to register to vote online? And we'll start this with Bobby.
Well, I certainly would support anyone who wants to get registered to vote getting registered. committing myself to a specific imaginary bill without the devil in the details is something I couldn't commit to. One of the first things I learned at the Capitol for the first 2 years is you can commit to a cause, which I would happily commit to that cause. But voting for a specific bill, oftentimes the devil's in the details, and making sure that everything could be done in a manner that respected everyone's voting rights. If that was guaranteed, if it was guaranteed that the person who wants to register is the person that's registering, that's something I could support. So in theory, I would support that cause, but I wouldn't commit to supporting a specific bill until I had a chance to actually read it.
Okay. Kevin?
I agree with Mr. Kaufman that until it's in front of me, until I know what it actually says, I don't know if I would be able to support it. There again, in theory, if that person is the person that is requesting to register online, I do not find a problem with that, or I do not see a problem with that. But I just want to make sure that that is the person that is requesting to be registered.
Okay, thank you. And David?
Well, I think it's important not to overthink this. I mean, all bills are imaginary bills at one time. And I think the question is, do we support the concept? I certainly support the concept. I think anything that we can do to increase voter participation in this country is a good thing, because when we have low voter turnout, then we're not really experiencing democracy. So anything that we can do to increase voter turnout is a good thing. So I would support that. Furthermore, what I would also like to see is we can increase our voter turnout if we also allow our voters to automatically receive absentee ballot forms. So if they choose to use absentee ballot forms this year, there should be a little checkoff button that says, you know what, I want to receive absentee ballots all the time. This way we can increase our voter base throughout the state, and we'll have a more accurate representation of what's going on in Des Moines. So yes, I do support it.
Thank you. The next question is from LULAC. Several states have passed DREAM Act registration, which allows students, DREAM Act legislation, which allows students who are not citizens and who meet certain criteria to receive in-state tuition at public universities. If elected, would you support such a bill for Iowa? Why or why not? And we are going to start with Mr. Kinney.
I don't know enough about it to give a logical or an informed decision. I do feel that if a student is here and is being taken care of or is a ward of ours, that they should be able to have in-state tuition. But I really don't know enough about the DREAM Act. It's the first time I've ever actually heard of it.
Okay. Mr. Kinney?
That was Mr.
Oh,
Kinney.
I'm sorry. Who's
Probably me next, I imagine.
Yeah, Mr. Johnson.
Well, there was actually a bill put forth, and yes, I would support it. The thing to know about this is we have somewhere between 8,000 and 13,000 undocumented minors in Iowa going to our elementary and high school. Think about that, 18,000 to 13,000. So what we need to ask ourselves is, whatever your view is on whether or not they should be legal citizens or not is really irrelevant. We have to take a more pragmatic approach. How do we want these folks to fit into our society? Do we want to give them benefits so that they can have good jobs and thus become more productive citizens and pay us more taxes? The answer to me is really a no-brainer. Of course we should be giving these folks in-state tuition. We should be trying to get as much education into our population any way we can. I would go one step further as well. I work in the registrar's office for the University of Iowa, and my job is to certify veterans that are going to school on the GI Bill. And there are some holes in our state law right now that differentiate in-state tuition and out-of-state tuition for different types of vets. And this is something that I've been preaching for 2 years. Right now, if a veteran comes back and they're eligible for this post-9/11 GI Bill, Iowa will give them in-state tuition, but only for the undergraduate college. This is a missed opportunity because we probably lose about 30 potential students a year to the med schools, pharmacy, dental, because we don't have that. So in addition to helping pass this DREAM Act for the education, I would also include veterans to go to some of the graduate or professional schools as well.
Mr. Kaufman.
On the issue of immigration as a whole, and I'll talk about the DREAM Act as well, to me, this is an issue that, I mean, my family is a family of immigrants, and I certainly would encourage anyone and everyone to come to this state legally. And on the specifics of the DREAM Act, again, I'm with Kevin. I know that it's fun and easy to sit up here and support concepts as someone who's not a legislator, but as someone who is a legislator, concepts are not always exactly what you're supporting in theory. And so a specific bill is something I would still need to see. But I would also make sure that before anything like that would happen, anybody in this state that wanted to receive in-state tuition should not take a back seat to anybody that's not. And anybody from in the surrounding states that want to have in-state tuition, I don't care of your color, of your race, that has nothing to do with this. To me, it's about making sure that our legal citizens have first choice and that anyone that wants to come here and be legal also has that option as well.
Okay, thank you. Audience questions are going to start. What priority will you place on taking Iowa's per student spending from the bottom of the national average to the top, considering we now spend nearly $1,500 less per student than top states? And we will start with David Johnson.
Well, you know, we saw what happened this last year with the legislature failing to pass the allowable growth. I personally thought that was one of the most irresponsible things to ever not come out of the state legislature. It really put our school board members in a bind because if anybody who's ever had to make a budget at that level or even the city level, not having those concrete figures is just a nightmare. So for starters, we do need to pass the allowable growth. And I think we do need to make education a real priority in this state. We need to increase the funding. To me, every dollar we spend on education is also dollars we spend on economic stimulus. It really is, especially in this area. You know, the University of Iowa employs over 14,000 full-time workers, 5,000 part-time workers. Imagine, I mean, that's a lot of money in the economic equation of things. And if it's hard to grasp that, try to imagine what would happen if the University of Iowa shut their doors on Monday. Think of all the businesses that would collapse and, you know, all the people that have lost their jobs and the housing. It's just a critical key to our future and to our economic development. So I would place funding of education at the very highest priority, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you. Bobby Kaufman.
Well, I agree with David. It was irresponsible not to pass allowable growth, and I don't think there's much difference between the two of us here, because I was responsible, along with many others, for bringing 4% allowable growth to our schools for 2015. I was one of only 3 Republicans that voted multiple times for 6% allowable growth, so we're both pretty good on the education issue. And I hope also, in all fairness, that while I'm condemning our current legislature for not passing allowable growth, I would hope that David will also join me in calling previous legislatures in Democratic control just as irresponsible for not passing this. This whole hot potato thing has got to stop. I'm a strong supporter of passing as much allowable growth as we can fiscally afford as soon as possible. It's a huge percentage of our budget. Let's get that out of the way the first year. I've been a strong vocal supporter of that. I've got the support of most of our local superintendents, and I will continue to be a strong pro-education legislator.
Thank you. Kevin Kinney.
I was at the board when we found out, the school board, I'm on the Clear Creek Amana School Board, and when we found out there was, the legislature did not pass the allowable growth. That puts you, as a school board member, as a superintendent, trying to figure your budget out behind the 8 ball. You don't know how to, you don't know which teachers you're going to have to pink slip. It just puts you at such a disadvantage. I am for funding our schools. I am for also, I want to fund our community colleges because I think our community colleges have to collaborate with our schools to make our schools better and stronger and give those students more opportunities in the future. And to me, it makes good sense because it allows you to give those students additional classes that they may not be able to have in our different schools, especially some of our smaller rural schools. The ICN network is a good tool. So we need to expand those areas of education also.
Okay, and David Johnson.
I think I answered
Oh,
this one.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. One more
I'd be happy to give you some more time.
One more education question before we move on, because there's a lot of education questions. Should Iowa require all school districts to offer free preschool for 4-year-olds? Also, how should Iowa provide enough funding to guarantee access for all? And on this one, we start with Bobby Kaufman.
I do not support statewide mandatory preschools for one reason. Number one, any parents that can afford it should be able and should have to pay for the preschool themselves. Now, that being said, I am a strong supporter of having as much funds as are needed that is accessible and ready to go for any family that wants to send their child to preschool but cannot afford it. Those funds should be immediately available. There should be a process that can go through immediately so that the state could cover those that truly cannot afford it. But I believe our dollars can be better invested, not in taking away from wealthy families and giving them free preschool, but rather making those dollars go towards more allowable growth and more for our community colleges.
Thank you. Kevin Kinney.
I think that we should have a mandatory pre-K or preschool for the children. I feel that the children that are in those classes, it shows that those kids do much better in the future. There have been studies done how much farther ahead those kids are than kids that do not have the preschool. And I just feel that everyone in our state deserves to have mandatory preschool, and that's where I stand.
Thank you. David Johnson.
I do think we need to have this mandatory preschool. The amount of the wealthy people that Bobby is talking about is so minuscule that it's irrelevant. As far as the revenue, this is a state that is giving hundreds of millions of dollars to Orascom for 165 jobs. So I don't buy the argument that we don't have the revenue to do it. It's just that we don't have legislators who prioritize that. I think we've seen that time and time and again with the Republican Party, and the only way we're going to change it is if we change the majority. That's unfortunately the cold hard facts. So when you go to the polls and education is your top priority, you need to think about that and think about historically what the House Republicans and the Republican senators and our governor have been doing to education to the state. It's disgusting.
Okay. Next question, moving to the nutrient reduction strategy. There's several questions, and I'm going to try to combine. What percentage of farmers need to participate in order to consider the strategy a success? What measures should be the minimum to be considered as participating? How would you ask the Gulf Coast fishing industry for continued patience while we keep affecting their fishing grounds, waiting for voluntary strategies to make progress? So this is about our water quality. It's kind of a three-part question. Appreciate anything you can do to answer that. And I think we start with Kevin Kinney.
I think it needs to be voluntary. Our farmers are, along with the NRCS and other state agencies, have done and are doing a better job at reducing the nutrients that are going into our streams. A lot of it depends on what type of farmer you are, along what type of stream you're on, to tell me, or to be able to tell you what type of runoff that you may have. A percentage, I can't tell you a percentage of farmers. It all depends on the way that farmer farms. If that farmer is split applying nitrogen, if that farmer is banding his fertilizer, it makes a huge difference. So with that, we need to continue to work with our farmers, giving our farmers the incentive to put in filter strips, to put in waterways to reduce the nitrogen intake. On our farm, I have reverted some ground back to wetland reserves to filter the nutrients that are going into the streams, so they're not getting there. That's just one of the things that I've elected to do.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Yes, Mr. Johnson.
Well, whether it's mandatory or voluntary, the state is going to have to give the farmers the tools to do the job right. We have to give those resources. But I would also point out that from a city standpoint, and having served on a city council, cities have an obligation to clean up their act as well. I remember while I was serving, we got new numbers down from the DNR as far as nitrates in our lagoon systems. And what we found out was during the winter months, when the temperature is colder, the lagoon system that we have was not doing the job, right? So we know that in a few years, when these new regulations are actually starting to be enforced, our city, as well as a lot of other small communities in Iowa, are going to have to pony up some money to fix this problem. So we as state legislators need to be able to start thinking ahead about helping these cities do it. I mean, it's all in our best interest to clean this up, because if we don't clean it up, then our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren are going to have to clean it up or suffer the consequences. So to me, it's just a matter of survival. Now, we're obviously going to run into some pretty stiff competition from some of the big ag forces that are out there that are going to be fighting that. But this is where you're going to have to look at the integrity of your state legislator. And one of the things that I always tell constituents is, if they're confused about the way a legislator is voting on an issue that they think is a no-brainer, you need to go look at who's donating to their campaign, and that'll tell you a hell of a lot.
Thank you. Bobby Kaufman?
I'm assuming Mr. Johnson's not questioning my integrity, because my voting record on water quality initiatives is impeccable. I voted for record water quality funding. I voted for the $2.4 million nutrient reduction strategy. I supported record investments in this. So questioning my integrity and having this venue be the time to end this positive campaign, I think is a little tacky, David. But that being said, also demonizing big ag isn't going to help either. And big ag, the big boogeyman that David always refers to, were the leaders in pushing for these water quality initiatives. They were pushing for these new dollars. It absolutely needs to be voluntary. If you look at what happened with our funds, those funds that we put in for voluntary for nutrient reduction strategy, they were zapped up in days. And I strongly did not support Governor Branstad's veto of more of those water quality funds, and I would push strongly to restore those next year. So when it comes to my integrity as a whole and my integrity on water quality, I have an impeccable record that I'm proud to stand on.
Okay. Next question. This is the last question before the wrap-up. Will you support reasonable legislation that restores the voting rights of Iowans convicted of felonies upon release from prison or upon completion of parole or probation? Well, you're starting with Mr. Johnson.
Yes, I think that makes absolute sense. If somebody has served their time and paid their debts to society, and if you want to bring them back into society as productive members, then you need to give them all of the benefits that the rest of us have, right? If you try to exclude them out of the process, then there's really there's no skin in the game for them. We want to get those folks involved because they have a different perspective on society, one that you and I might not have. So yes, I would very much be in favor of giving them their voting rights.
Bobby Kaufman.
For me, it'd be a tiered system. If you're looking at a non-violent felon who's coming back into society, willing to go through the proper channel, which already currently exists, it's up to the governor, then yeah, I would support further expansion of their voting rights to be expanded. When it comes to a child rapist or a murderer, no, I would have no time of day for someone like that.
Okay. Kevin Kinney.
In most cases, I would not resist a felon after they have completed their probation or parole to be able to gain their voting rights back. I again do feel that in some cases where if it's going to be a murderer or a rapist, they're going to be in prison the rest of their life because of our mandatory life in prison for first-degree murder. So I don't see that as being a problem, but once they get out, they complete the parole, they complete the probation, I would not have a problem with that.
Thank you. I just realized, I think I have more time. Sorry. So we've got a lot more good questions. Okay, would you vote for a constitutional amendment to bar marriage for same-sex couples? This one, we're starting with Mr. Kaufman.
I did not co-sponsor any of that legislation last year, and to me, this is no longer a legislative issue. This is a courts issue. You've got strong advocates on both sides, those that are strongly in favor, those that are strongly against, and this constant volley between the district courts and between the legislatures in this country is giving those complete uncertainty. I think the Supreme Court needs to finally make a final decision on this. This volleying back and forth between legislatures and the district courts is just unfair to everybody. So I would just ask the Supreme Court to make a final ruling so this issue is settled once and for all.
Mr. Kinney?
I would not support that. I feel that those people, they're individuals. They can make their own choices, and it's something that I do not feel should be in the state legislature. That it is not something that we should be looking at. That's an individual choice.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, the Iowa State Supreme Court already ruled on it, and they got it right. You know, the folks that are pushing this are the folks that our grandchildren are going to be looking at in the history books, right next to guys like Governor Wallace. They're wrong on the issue. And if you're not willing to step up and say that, I think you're also wrong on the issue. To me, again, this is just a no-brainer that I can't believe we're even discussing in the 21st century. It blows my mind.
Okay, thank you. College students are graduating with bachelor's and advanced degrees with enormous debt that will cripple them as working productive citizens. Why won't the state appropriate funding to keep education affordable? And we start with Mr. Kinney.
In Iowa, I think Iowa is one of the cheaper states. That's why all the students from Illinois come to Iowa. It's still ridiculously high. I would like to see more programs where if students go into public service, some of that money is forgiven. And that may be a good way to spur our growth back into our communities and have our communities grow, our smaller communities, by having our students stay here in Iowa.
Mr. Johnson?
Well, I think there are a couple of reasons why education is getting higher and the lack of support from the state. I mean, one, I think there's a general misunderstanding that education is a burden, and it's not. We need to retrain our legislators to understand that education is an investment. It's not a burden. And we reap the benefits immediately. We don't have to wait 18 years. We don't have to wait 4 years. We get those benefits immediately. The cynical part of me says that a lot of people in the legislature don't want to increase education. The funding for it, because they don't want a well-educated, well-informed voter. I mean, that's like the most cynical thing that I see. But it's more and more I'm starting to believe that this is the case. So the answer is, again, we need to have a new majority in the House. We need to maintain the majority in the Senate. We got to get rid of this governor. And then we will see an increase into our education and the values that go with it.
Well, David, I do believe you get the most absurd quote of the year award. That's got to be the most ridiculous and offensive thing I've ever heard, and you're dead wrong. I know those folks you're talking about, and you're just not correct. I'd like to also put out a couple facts. The state of Iowa is one of only 2 states since the recession to increase education funding by over 10%. Us and North Dakota are the only 2 states who have increased education funding since the recession by 10%. That's with Governor Branstad in office. That's with the House Majority in office. Again, you can parrot talking points all day long, and that's wonderful for your campaign, but it's not a reality. And the reality is that I'm not even sure the premise of the question is proper, because in this state, we have had a record-breaking 2nd year in a row tuition freeze. We have frozen tuition. So, to say that we're making it unaffordable is not legislatively accurate. So I'm just going to go back to my continued positive campaign and continue to support education. I will continue to support it when I'm reelected.
Okay, next question. What will you do about hunger and homelessness and the unemployed in Iowa? And this one, we start with Mr. Kinney. No, I'm sorry, we start with Mr. Johnson.
Well, the first thing we can do is look at the minimum wage. The amount that we have for minimum wage is obviously not a livable wage, right? I know that there's a push to push it up to 10.10. That will never pass with the current legislature. That will never get signed by the current governor. I think that by increasing the minimum wage, we have an opportunity to give the tools to those that are within that pay scale to bring themselves out of poverty. And in doing so, you're going to relieve yourself the burden that they place on some of our social programs. Why should you and I as a taxpayer be subsidizing poor wages from companies like McDonald's and Burger King that are not willing to pay a livable wage? To me, that makes no sense. So I would go ahead and push for a higher minimum wage. I would like to see it at about $15 an hour. And I'm not just pulling that number out of the air. There's a logic to that number. I sat down and I looked at what it takes to get yourself a college education, which is what it takes to get yourself a decent career to move up the ladder. And here in Iowa, at the current tuition rate, if somebody is earning $15 an hour, it's feasible to make those monthly payments at the university for room, board, tuition. It would be really hard because you'd still have to work 40 hours a week, but that is a possibility. And I think if we do that, or if we at least push for that $15 an hour, we're more likely to get something of a higher wage in there. Thanks.
Okay, Mr. Kaufman.
Well, David's advocating for change in leadership in the House of Representatives for not getting minimum wage passed. Would you too then also encourage a change in the Senate Democratic leadership? Because there were 3 minimum wage bills this year. 2 of them didn't even get a committee vote, and none of them got a floor vote. So in a Democratic Senate, you didn't even get a 10-10 minimum wage vote, so I'll be anxious to see if you're calling for that leadership change as well. As far as poverty and the homeless and how to help that, I think the first thing we can look at is our local foods. I strongly agree with Mike Carberry when he had spoke about local foods. It's a cheap, healthy way for those that are poor to be able to oftentimes trade at the local markets when they don't have money to pay for things. So I think that this state should do more to promote, again, with what Kevin said, on our community colleges to get folks retrained. I think that we can encourage more local food growth that will have more accessible, healthy food for all. And I don't think that the answer to every question lies in it's the Republicans' fault. I believe this district's pretty diverse. I believe this district is something that represents by everybody, and not every single issue can be solved by saying put Democrats in charge.
Mr. Kinney.
I do feel the minimum wage has to be raised. To what point, I don't know. But I would like to put a cost of living index on the minimum wage wherever it may go. So it comes out of, or it stays out of the political realm. Let it grow on its own. I don't know where it's going to come or where it'll wind up, where it'll be set. That's for us to yet to be seen. But it does need to raise. As far as poverty and people in need of hunger that are hungry, we do have to work with, educate these people, and teach these people how to grow food. We need to teach them how to prepare food. So many of these people have never sat down and cooked a meal, and you can take a number of different food banks. From what I've been told, these people come in, they look at these different foods. They don't know how to prepare them. They don't know how to keep them. They just need to learn how to do some of this on their own. But that goes back to us. We need to show them, and we need to teach these people how to do and change their lifestyle.
Okay, thank you. This will be the last question before the wrap-up. Will you support legislation to repeal the Medicaid offset that requires repayment of savings from the Iowa Health and Wellness Plan? And what will you do to make sure the regional system has the resources needed to improve access to care throughout the state? And we'll start with Bobby Kaufman.
Well, that's an incredibly intricate question.
Should I repeat it?
No, that's okay. I got it. When you look at the Healthy Iowa Plan, I'm not exactly sure what you mean by sending back our savings. I don't know that that's been an issue, but I certainly think that the state legislature has done a good job in complying with the rulings that the federal court handed down to us, and that said that we have to comply with the Affordable Care Act, like it or not. It's something that we're legally obligated to do, and so I supported the Healthy Iowa Plan. It's a way of giving people investment in their own health. It's a way of having people help pay into the system, even if it's just a couple dollars a month, giving them sort of an investment in their own health. And it's kind of the Iowa version. And I think the state has been doing well with it. As far as specific details like that, I can't tell you that I've seen rampant issues with it, but I think the Healthy Iowa Plan as a whole has been wholly successful given the fact that it's something that we were forced to comply with, and I think we've done a good job doing so.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Kinney?
The Healthy Iowa Plan was put into place to conform to the Affordable Care Act, and I don't know enough about it to sit here and tell you all these intricate details of it, because I know it is very complicated. It is one of those issues that is out there that we are required to conform and follow the law, and I do feel that with the Affordable Care Act that it's there. I just don't know enough about it, and I'm not going to sit here and tell you I do, because I don't.
Okay, Mr. Johnson.
Well, I think the Affordable Care Act got watered down tremendously in the fight that it took to get it into place. But I do think it was a good first start, and I think it's something that we can build on. I'm one of these people that has an idea that there are certain areas that are purview to the government. Like, I think both Bobby Kaufman and I can agree on that the government has a place in defense of our country. I think we can both agree on the fact that our policing needs to be part of the purview of government, and taxation. Perhaps we differ on medical care for our citizens. I simply see it as this is something that we need to do for our own economic security, because what happens when you have people that are uninsured is they wind up going to the emergency room. It costs us more, and you and I are going to pay for it anyways. We're going to pay for it in higher premiums. So why not have a system in place that incorporates everybody? And we need to take advantage of what the Affordable Care Act is giving us, and we need to build on that and make it a better system. That's the answer.
Thank you. Now it's time for the wrap-up, and I think we have time for each candidate to summarize for 2 minutes their positions and why they think they should be elected to the House or Senate. And we will start with Mr. Kinney.
I feel with my years of service, my entire adult life has been community service, and it has been the service of everyone, to our children and to our older adults. My goal, if elected, is I would really like to work in crime victim services for victims of crime. The last 12 years, I have done mostly crimes against persons, the sexual assaults, the homicides, or I become very active in the human trafficking arena. And we do not have services that fit, that meet the needs of those people. The other thing that I would like to work on is mental health issues. When I started at the Sheriff's Office 28 years ago, we had all the mental health facilities in the state of Iowa. They began systematically shutting down. Those people were released from those mental health facilities, and there was no one there to monitor their medications. And those people then went out and they would break the law and they would get put in jail. Our jails and prisons have become the largest mental health institute in the state of Iowa at this point. We need to set up a system where we have clinics in our small towns, in our rural areas, where people monitor and work with these different individuals, because these people, most of them, can be very productive individuals as long as they stay on their medications. The other thing is education. We need to have a strong educational system here in Iowa, and I am here to advocate for that.
Thank you. Mr. Johnson.
Well, if I can have you walk away with one thought in mind, I want you to think about the corporate money that is in politics. Now, I know that Bobby may feel like I'm picking on him, but I will tell you quite frankly that Republicans don't have a monopoly on big corporate money. Our side does it too. I don't. I refuse to take any corporate interest money at all, and there's a reason for that. One, when I get to Des Moines, I don't want any of these corporate interests to feel that they have any power or authority over the way I vote. But more importantly, I don't want any of my constituents to ever look at my vote and say, God, did this guy get any donations from Deere and Company or Monsanto? Is that why he voted that way? I don't want that to even be a question in your mind. So it's off the table for me. And I think if we start to make those demands of our legislators and senators in any party, we're going to be a lot better off. But two things have to happen, right? We have to have candidates that refuse to take it, but more importantly, we have to have voters that will step up and vote for those people. So that is probably one of the biggest differences there are between Bobby and myself. And it's not something that is personal, because I actually like Bobby Kaufman as a human being. We just differ on this philosophy, and that's just the way it is in politics, right? So when you walk away tonight, I want you to go home and I want you to look at who donated to my campaign, and I want you to look at who donated to his campaign and everybody else who's running, and just look at them and let that sink in for a bit. And thank you very much for attending tonight.
Thank you. And Bobby Kaufman.
Well, I see we're doubling down on the questioning of my integrity yet again. And I am actually really glad that David asked you to view our reports, because I would actually strongly encourage you to look at your reports. For someone who's so sanctimonious on corporate donations, I'd like to say that I'm glad you don't accept them, David, because they're illegal. No one can accept corporate donations in the state. It's illegal. So I, too, do not accept corporate donations. As it comes to business interests donating to me, I'm proud of the fact that I have the support of businesses in our district, as do Bob Dvorsky, Bruce Braley, Jack Hatch. Are you planning on not voting for any of them? I'm guessing you are. But let's look at your report specifically. 43% of David's money comes from political parties. 20% comes from money outside of the district, 15% of that which is out of the state, and then 7% of his dollars come from special interests in the Democratic Party. So 70% of the funds of the guy who's running the campaign for the little people doesn't even come from the little people. My track record is clear. I've got hundreds upon hundreds of people in my district that donate to my campaign in increments of $25, $35, $45. I believe in my constituents. I believe in my district. I don't have to rely on nonstop party talking points. I represent everybody. My litmus test for a vote is simple. Does it make sense? Is it good for the district? If the answer to that is yes, I support it. If the answer to that is no, I have a track record. I'm happy to tell a political party, an interest group, or a lobbyist no. It's been the honor of a lifetime to be your state representative, and I humbly ask for your support on or before November 4th.
Okay, our forum is over. Before we leave, I want to thank again LULAC. This was the first time we did this collaboration, and we appreciate their presence and their willingness to try to, become engaged in this way. And also thank you to the candidates, all of them that were here tonight, the audience, and those watching at home. Good night.